just recently, this is within the past couple of days, some really horrifying information coming out of what I call the American front. And what are these? Now, the Israeli government and military and intelligence officials are admitting that the American government is leaking intelligence, Israeli supplied intelligence, to our embarrassment and worse. We apparently alerted the Americans that within 24 to 48 hours, we were going to initiate a strike against Iran. And surprise, surprise, the Americans leaked that information and telling the Iranians, we have nothing to do with this, of course.
I'm shocked.
I'm shocked. And when I came here 4 years ago, this was a problem. And there was a lot of hard feeling within the Israeli military intelligence, within the political echelon, over who was leaking this stuff to the Americans. Some of it was not authorized. That somehow the Americans were being told that something was going to happen within the next few days or hours, and it would appear in the New York Times, endangering our operation and sometimes preventing it from occurring. And all this eventually leaked back, or if you followed it back, to the Mossad. And even during my ordeal in prison, I was told point blank, don't have anything to do with the Mossad. And I asked why. They said they want you dead. One way or the other, they don't want you coming home. They are considered to be a wholly owned subsidiary of the CIA. And even now, after I came out, I'm more or less under the protection of the Shabak for that reason, and not the Mossad. I was told that if the Mossad had anything to do with me, I would have a very short life here. My life expectancy would be very short. So I feel that at least when we talk about the need for military reform, we also need to have intelligence reform, particularly in terms of the Mossad. They are simply too close to the Americans to be trusted. And so
I should interrupt you for one moment and point out that people in the know have understood this for quite some time. For example,
quite some time.
Many years ago now, I cannot recall exactly how many years it is, maybe it's 15 years or more. It seems that Israel at that time was about to attack the Iranian nuclear program.
Yeah. Classic example. It was,
in fact, we're talking about the 90s, I think the late 90s, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Bibi was prime minister.
It's more than 15 years ago. It's more like 25, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And Netanyahu was prime minister, and at that time the defense minister was that well-known
Ehud Barak.
Criminal Ehud Barak.
Correct.
Because of whom we have the Northern Front.
Correct.
Amongst other things.
Amongst other things.
And Netanyahu ordered the chief of staff of the army at that time, Gabi Ashkenazi, and the head of the Mossad at that time, Meir Dagan, to prepare plans for a strike against Iran.
Both of whom
and they refused.
Both of whom I consider to be traitors.
Exactly. They both refused, but not only did they refuse,
and
they themselves turned, apparently mainly Dagan, Meir Dagan, the head of the Mossad, and this ties in with what you were just saying. He turned to his American handlers and controllers and informed them of this intention and also asked them to bring pressure to bear that such a strike not take place.
So the Americans went public.
Exactly.
And Ashkenazi
the Mossad
was just as guilty.
The Mossad is not does not really work for the people of Israel
at all. They work for the.
This is something that many people have not been willing to realize and accept, but this is the fact.
At a minimum, they work for their own self-interests, narrowly defined, but from a broader perspective, they're really, as they were explained to me, a wholly owned subsidiary of the CIA. And so you have this situation now where the Americans were forewarned, given time, of some kind of strike we were going to undertake against Iran.
Speaking about recent days.
Yeah. And lo and behold, it was leaked publicly by the Americans. I would say preventively, and with the added statement by the Americans that we don't have anything to do with this. This is strictly Israeli. Don't retaliate against us.
What's called a preemptive leak.
I call it preventively, but it could be preemptively as well, given the timing. But it's ironic that at right now, American forces, both in Iraq and in Syria, are getting hammered by Iranian proxy forces in the Shiite militia, Iraqi Shiite militia. And what are the Americans doing? They're telling the Iranians, the Jews are coming to hit you somewhere, instead of undertaking the action themselves for what their own forces are experiencing right now. Rocket fire, drone attacks, commando raids, IEDs, you name it. And what is the Biden administration doing? They're hamstringing us. That's one thing. The second thing, which is really complicated, but people have to understand this, that in the coming few weeks, possibly a month, the chief prosecutor, Karim Khan of the International Criminal Court, is prepared apparently to issue arrest warrants for Bibi Netanyahu and other unknown Israeli politicians and high-ranking military officers. Now, if you know anything about Karim Khan, he's an American puppet. They put him in office, and basically because they needed their rendition facilities in Afghanistan, torture facilities, of which I'm very well aware of what they're capable of doing. There are torture facilities in Afghanistan and in Europe to shut the investigation down against them. And he complied. He shut the investigations down. So now it seems that the Americans have asked him to issue arrest warrants for Bibi and others. Now, you have to ask what's really going on here. And it's my opinion, assessment, if you will, that the Americans are trying as hard as they can to stage a coup d'etat through the courts against a democratically elected conservative government of Israel. And how are they going to do that? Well, once the arrest warrants are issued, you will see Yair Lapid and a host of progressive NGOs, the ones that do lawfare in this country, NGOs, and the Attorney General, submitting documents to the Bagatz, to the High Court, asking the High Court to force Bibi and anyone else who's received the arrest warrants to step down, because you can't have a serving prime minister not just under indictment, but under an arrest warrant. And that once this happens and the High Court plays along with it, we're going to have at best a constitutional crisis. Well, we don't have a constitution, but there'll be a political crisis in the country if Bibi and others refuse to step down. And then we'll have the balagan on the streets, redoubled or trebled or quadrupled, with all these crazies, the Kaplan Force and Brothers in Arms and others saying, how can we have a prime minister serve who is not just under indictment, but under an arrest warrant and a ruling by the High Court that he cannot continue to serve as prime minister? So people have to understand that whether you like Bibi Netanyahu or not, or whether you like some of the people who may be issued arrest warrants or not, or whether you like some of the high-ranking military officers or not that are going to receive these arrest warrants, we cannot allow this coup d'etat to occur under any circumstances. Boy, do I have I think everybody listening to this podcast understands I have serious fundamental problems with the way this war has been conducted by Bibi, by the war cabinet, and by the military. Yet in spite of that, I will defend these individuals who are issued the arrest warrants some of the last breath of my life, because it's a question of our maintaining our independence, not from any exterior threat, regional threat, but from the Americans. I've told people the Americans now constitute another front in our multi-front war. Okay? So the question I have, Rav, is whether Gantz and Eisenkot and even Gallant are going to be issued these arrest warrants. I'm unsure. My feeling is that they will not be, because the Americans need Gallant and Eisenkot to be kosher.
We should just make clear for those not quite familiar with Israeli politics, Gallant, Yoav Gallant, is the defense minister, and Benny Gantz and Eisenkot are the two other members of the triumvirate of the war cabinet.
The war cabinet.
So it remains to be seen whether you can these racist Islamo-Nazi enemies of the Jewish people, such as Karim Khan, the Pakistani, one should point out, and therefore you can well imagine where his heart lies.
Sentiments are.
It's not obvious how you can issue an arrest warrant for one and not another member of the same war cabinet.
They can do anything.
Yeah, they can, but it will be it would be somewhat difficult to explain and defend. Anyway, we shall see. You shall see if these reports, in fact, materialize into something concrete. It's certainly a very interesting development.
The whole effort, the focus of the American attack on Israeli democracy has been focused laser-like on Bibi and Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, the two leaders of the right-wing parties. No one else has been mentioned ever. Benny Gantz, never. Gadi Eisenkot, never. And now Yair Lapid, and by the way, Gallant, never. So you have Yair Lapid going to the United States just recently and coming back and spewing information, just spewing comments about, how Bibi Netanyahu and his right-wing government, not the war cabinet, the right-wing government, are exclusively responsible for October 7th. Wow. Isn't that a coincidence? So people should be on guard now as to what the American agenda is, where the real threat to this country is from the American front. It's the American front. And don't be confused by this latest allocation of money, several billions of dollars from the administration. It just happened yesterday, where the Senate approved, after Congress approved, the House of Representatives approved the aid bill in favor of Taiwan, Ukraine, and Israel. All that money that is coming, supposedly allocated to us, is going straight to the American military-industrial complex. Our military-industrial people here won't see a penny of it. And by the way, an equally large percentage of that allocation, guess what, is going for humanitarian relief of the Palestinians, so-called Palestinians in Gaza. Okay? What about our displaced people? 65, 70,000 from the north. They haven't even been mentioned, or the ones in the south. They haven't even been mentioned once by the Americans because they don't exist as far as they are concerned. And I don't just blame the Americans for this oversight. I blame our own government for that by saying, unless, you start, if you want to provide aid to Gaza, then you get the hostages out, and then we'll allow you to supply aid.
I could not agree with you more, of course, but for that you need a totally different caliber of leadership.
Agreed.
Leadership with the vision that has within it true galvanized national will and is not driven by a galuth mentality.